to the lecture on stress awareness and management for UAS 109, Crew Resource Management, Warren Community College. Let's begin by revisiting some of the things we learned in our UAS 105 course, which prepares us for Part 107 test. We talked then about stress, and you had to know this for your Part 107 test. You had to know that it really was or is a medical or biological context. And stress is physical, mental, or emotional in nature. And it's a factor that can cause you both tension to your body and tension to your mind. Stresses can come from outside of ourselves, like the environment, from psychological, or from social situations, or they can be what we would call internal, or within the body. And that part would be illness, a medical procedure, a medication, other aspects of that. Stress will often initiate a kind of confrontation or run from things. So you get a fight or flight kind of response when you're involved in stress. And it's a complex reaction of neurological and endocrinological systems. And there are lots of causes for pilot stress. But with one thing about pilot stress that we have to keep in mind is it will affect your decision making and it will affect your risk mitigation. So then it ultimately affects the safety of everyone around you. And you have to think of this not only in terms of the pilot, but also in terms of every member of the crew. We can get chronic stress for stress that continues beyond. And this is when your body or your mind get to a certain point. And that point, we have to remember, is different for every individual. Where your body starts to give you signs that it is reaching the limit of what it can possibly take. It can take no more. Once you cross this threshold, you begin, or any person begins, to really compromise their mental and physical health. And we can see some things, or some common symptoms of chronic stress: an inability to concentrate, poor judgment, moodiness. You might see irritability or short-tempered behavior. You can tell the person is feeling overwhelmed. You can sometimes even read this on somebody's face. They're constantly worrying. Some people will complain about chest pain, or even their heartbeat will elevate to the point of what we often call an anxiety attack. People may call out sick a lot, or they may actually be sick a lot because of the stress they're going through. They may not ever be able to relax or to sit back and get the things, clear their mind, if you will. You'll see procrastination and the neglecting of responsibilities. You may see people use alcohol excessively, drugs excessively, or they may smoke. They used to call that chain smoking, where a person just smoked one cigarette after another. All these are attempts to relax the body. You're using things outside of the norm. And then ultimately, the worst thing that can happen is depression, and a very serious depression can set on in individuals. So stress is not something that you don't want to take seriously in yourself and on your crew. Another concept that is very similar but different is the idea of fatigue. And this was usually evidenced in a lack of energy or a lack of motivation, and it can be physical or mental. It's not drowsiness. It's a kind of deep tired. And it really takes a healthcare professional, a psychiatrist or psychologist to distinguish these kinds of attributes. You may become confused, shortness of breath, experience muscle weaknesses. Again, these are all symptoms that can occur at the same time, or they can be differentiated. Fatigue is a normal response to physical or mental activity. In most normal individuals, it's relieved by rest. Usually in hours to about a day, you can kind of reduce the fatigue by reducing your activity. So when we talk about aviation physiology, it's important because in the UAS industry, we're responsible for managing our stress, and we're almost responsible for diagnosing ourselves and our crew. Okay, so beware of your physiological condition, and terminate operations when you experience any of these. And you have to have self-awareness. You want to build this up as the remote pilot in command because you're responsible. There isn't a regular medical checkup. There isn't a regular psychological exam that you go through. It's up to you to make the determination, which means if you're the remote pilot in command and you're responsible, it's up to you to know what's going on with your crew. Ultimately, you want to ask one question as a pilot, and that is, am I fit to fly? Am I okay to fly today? You want to ask about your crew, are they okay to be involved in flight operations? So you have a lot of responsibility. It's not something you're necessarily trained in, but we're going to go over some of the signs, and you want to be cognizant of them and be aware of what could be going on around you. So welcome to the wonderful world of stress. If you're in this class and you've gone through other classes, you're in college, you have work life, you have family life, you already know stress. You know a certain amount of it. But we're going to talk about stress at a level where it really impacts your ability to perform comprehensive, safe operations in the sky. So let's talk about your abilities and that of your crew. Directly related to the physical and emotional state of individuals are three things that are inherently important to flight operations. If you are experiencing stress in the physical and emotional state that is so severe, it can impact your decision making. Matter of fact, I would argue that some degree of stress always impacts your decision making, but maybe not. Maybe it's lessened to the point where it's not so severe that you can't operate a machine. So this is up to you to kind of figure out. It will impact your judgment, and in impacting decision making and judgment, it ultimately will impact the risk mitigation that you're trying to do at any time. It'll increase risk, decrease safety, and that's an important consideration to keep in mind. We go through a couple kinds of stress, so we should think about those as well, and we should be cognizant of them as we're looking at our crew and thinking about what our crew could take. There's physical stress, and this is what the body's physical response to stressors, such as temperature or noise. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we talk about something like heat stroke. And we went over this in part 107, and it's important that you're familiar with this so you can see the signs, because this heat stroke, or even your body moving towards being affected by heat stroke, is going to cause physical stress to you. So it's a condition caused by your body overheating, okay? So think about it like this. It usually happens when your body temperature rises to 104. So from 98 degrees to 104. So those 6 degrees really are important, and it often happens in the summer months. Some of the signs of heat stroke, or some of the symptoms you're going to see, are high body temperature. You're going to feel your temperature rising, okay? So we often use one of those temperature guns to make sure the lithium batteries. Use it on yourself too. Monitor your crew's temperature. Monitor it over time, especially if you're out there on a hot day. You can mitigate some of this and say it's time for a break. It's time to get out of the heat. Okay? If your iPad has become so hot that it won't function anymore, you can almost take a step back and go, well, if the iPad's so hot, what about my body? What about myself? Where am I? How am I doing? And how's the rest of my crew doing? More important. Or equally important, probably. Altered mental state or behavior. You probably experienced this in your life. You're out there, it's hot, and you start to feel a little delirious over time. You start to be out there, and we often see this. I grew up in construction with my father's business, and we would see this by the end of a really hot August day in New Jersey with roofers up there. They would come down and just say silly things. Because basically they're heading towards this notion of heat stroke. So taking a rest, getting in the shade, drinking fluids are very important. You'll see alteration in sweating. You may start out the day drenched in sweat, but by the end of the day, it doesn't seem to be sweating anymore. And sometimes people think, oh, that's my heat. That really could be part of your body beginning to shut down. Could be dehydration coming on. For heaven's sake, if you're nauseous and you're vomiting, that's the time to end UAS operations at all times. Some of these others might be hard to notice, but if you've begun throwing up on the job, you have been out in the sun too long, or you're sick in another way that's going to affect operations. You'll see flushed skin on your crew members, and you should be thinking about that as well, because whatever's happening to them is likely also happening to you. You may see your breathing take an uptake and become more rapid. Your heart might become rate might become more rapid, and you might start to get a headache. All of these are signs on a hot day, especially a very hot day when you've been in the sun, that you need to take a rest. You need to rethink, is this the appropriate time? Am I fit to fly? Is one of the things you have to ask. Fortunately, in New Jersey, we get to not only experience high levels of heat, but in the winter, we get some really, really cold times as well. So, talk a little bit about your iPad going out in the heat. Well, you've seen this with batteries in the winter, where the battery starts to lose its voltage. Well, your body is not a battery, and everybody isn't affected the same way at the same time. But it's a pretty good indication. If you're having problems with your batteries, you're probably also having problems if you're not warm enough yourself. Hypothermia is a medical emergency, and this happens when your body goes in the opposite direction. So from the 98.6 to below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So those 3.5 degrees matter greatly. When your body temperature drops like that, your heart and nervous system and your other organs don't work as effectively anymore. And if you leave this untreated, you can have organ failure, heart and respiratory system failure, and ultimately you can die from hypothermia. So, no UAS operation is worth your life, and no UAS operation is worth the lives of your crew members or other innocent people around you who weren't part of the mission. So keep these in mind. We also have to think about physiological stress. Okay, so that was physical. Now this is physiological, and this is when we respond to stressors such as fatigue, which we just talked about, a lack of sleep, missed meals, lack of nourishment. All of these things can impact our ability to have sound judgment, good decision making, and will increase risk in our operations. So we want to diminish these. So you shouldn't fly when you're fatigued. You should get plenty of sleep, and you should eat well the morning of your flight operation so your mind is at its best, your mind and body are working together. Probably one of the most common forms of stress, or one people will talk about the most and recognize the most, is your body's response to emotional stress, such as peer pressure, marital problems, fear, anger, worry, debt, business issues, family issues, social issues. So there are many, many things that affect us emotionally. Ultimately, you want to be cognizant of all these in yourself and on your crew so you can maintain what we might call fitness for duty in your UAS operations. So some of the fitness to consider, and this is never an exhaustive, is illness. Am I sick today? Should I be flying? Could I be mentally challenged later by the illness in my body? Could it limit my ability to concentrate? Could it limit my ability to understand and make good decisions? All of these things you want to ask. Over the counter, under the counter, prescription or over the counter medications can have an impact on you. Something like Benadryl can affect some people not at all, and other people very, very severely, and that's over the counter. Something like a prescription drug that says do not operate heavy machinery, you should probably heed that advice. Now, I know that sometimes you take those pills and they don't have an impact on you. You won't know until it's too late. So if you're on these kinds of medications, that's not a good time to fly. We talked about stress, and that's what the basis of this chapter, looking for it in your crew members. Stress will impact your ability, and in fact, with chronic stress, your body may shut down, and you won't realize this, much like fatigue, until it's too late. Watch for crew members that might be taking excessive amounts of alcohol or drugs. Make sure when they show up that it's been at least 8 hours from bottle to throttle, or 8 hours since they drank. Make sure that those 8 hours, they didn't drink so excessively 8 hours ago that they're still above a 0.04 blood alcohol content. Alcohol and drugs can be a significant factor. A lot of people deal with stress using that as a mitigating factor. So think about that. When you have crew members who might have issues, if they show up and you can still smell the alcohol in the breath, they shouldn't be part of the crew that day. It's not right for them, it's not right to you, and it's not right to any other member of your crew, and most especially it's not right to anybody who might be in an airplane or on the ground who might be threatened by someone using unmanned aircraft in an inappropriate way. Fatigue, like we said, sometimes that doesn't even appear. So you need to be cognizant of what the signs and symptoms are. Familiarize yourself. All right? You're not going to be able to diagnose anyone, like I said, but you are able and you are responsible as the remote pilot in command to shut things down. So you need to be cognizant. You can't overwork people. We talked a little bit about this in workload. And then finally, eating and drinking. Food, water, to make sure that you're staying healthy, staying fit for duty. That's what you want to be able to do. And you know this. You know this and you learned it when you're Part 107. It's the FAA's I am safe, I illness, M medication, S stress, alcohol, A, F fatigue, and E eating, I am safe. So you can remember that and keep in mind these things as you're moving through your mission. We also know that you're going to experience or you're going to see stages of people in stress. So it's not as clear as it may seem, and at times the level of stress may gradually go up and then skyrocket. So we want to be aware of what are the levels of stress. So there could be what we call alarm reaction. This is when you recognize something as a stressor and you either confront that in your life or you flee from it and allow it to continue. Turn a blind eye, turtle up. We have all kinds of phrases in our society about people in the flee. All right? Often you'll see this as people become fearful of the future or fearful of their life, or they become angry unknowingly or unreasonably angry. These are kind of things you can see that are alarm reactions that are telling you this person is in stress. Your body is going to always attempt to compensate and resist this stress. It's going to try to repair the physical and mental damage. And here's the good news. Most of the time, you're going to be very effective at doing this. But when you're not, that's when you're going to become exhausted. And this is when the body cannot take it anymore and shuts down. Control is lost of your bodily functions. Your perspective is lost. So you're losing pieces of mind and body in exhaustion. And UAS flight operations are not safe at that point. Let's talk about some of the effects of stress. All right? Poor decision making. Look, maybe you get the whole UAS operation done, but you just alienated your entire crew for flying on a really stressful day. Or your crew members are now at each other because one of them was stressed and they spoke out aggressively towards other members of the team. So we have these issues we have to be aware of. So it's important to look at stress and to think about it in terms of risk and safety. All right? We know that everyone is going to come to the operation with some degree of stress. The question becomes, how much stress are they under, and what is the effect of that stress on your UAS operations? And that's up to you as the pilot in the command to kind of determine. What would be my personal advice? Always err on the side of caution. If you have at any point think that your operation could be jeopardized by a crew member who's under too much stress, you need to either change that crew member out or shut that operation down. All right? A lot of times we can't identify it in ourselves, so we also want our crew to communicate to us if we seem stressed. Boy, you were kind of overreacted to that, didn't you? Are you under a lot of stress? Is this a safe operation right now? Can you handle this? Should you be the person manipulating the controls? All kinds of questions and conversations you can have. Try to do it in a non-threatening way. Try to do it in a caring way. It's often hard because people under severe stress often don't take it very constructively. They view it as a personal attack, so you want to be aware of that. We all can reach the level of this kind of breakdown without realizing we're on the verge of it. So it's important that you and your crew communicate with one another. You and your crew discuss these things with one another, and that you have kind of agreed that if someone seems like they have too much stress that's going to increase risk, diminish safety, that you're going to take a proactive action. All right. Or you can use with the FAA. What was that famous question? How can you diminish stress? Remove it from your life. As if it's that easy. I always do like that. All right, let's talk about a couple of quiz questions for stress that we can talk about again. Name 3 ways that the body responds to the demands placed on it. What are 3 ways that your body will respond? Well, it's physical, physiological, and emotional. Okay? So it's physical. We talked about that, physical stress, physiological stress, emotional or social stress. These are the 3 ways that your body's going to respond to the demands from these 3 areas. So again, your body, the good news is most of the time is going to be able to compensate for these things. It's going to be able to overcome them. The problem is when it can't, it's catastrophic. What is the best cure for physical stress? If you're physically stressed, what should you do? You should work on prevention. Okay? If you're physically stressed, get out of the heat. All right? Get your body into a better place. Rest. Rehydrate. All of these things to reduce stress. So you should always have a water supply on hand. You should always have some kind of snack on hand in addition to your first aid kit. All right? Prevention is the key to making sure that you're operating safely and you're mitigating all risks. What type of stress often includes social factors such as living conditions, educational level? What is that known as? What is this kind of stress? And we know this. We went over it just a minute ago. That's the emotional stress. That's the type of stress that comes from the social world. When a remote pilot in command is exposed to prolonged discomfort, he or she will normally experience what type of stress at some point in the operation? Prolonged discomfort. That's physical stress. So think about that. Let's go back to that heat example that we used earlier. You're going to feel that. You'll feel discomfort as you start the day. In New Jersey, when it's hot and humid, we sometimes get to walk outside and go, all right? Can't even breathe the air in. You're already feeling the physical demands of the day. Does that mean you don't fly during that day? No. But then you want to turn up your antenna almost and think about and be more cognizant. Say, okay, I got to take extra precautions. Remember, prevention. Additional responsibility, off-duty education, sports, and or alcohol use can be a stress blank and a stress contributor. Well, it can be a stress reliever. Okay? Often a new responsibility can help relieve stress. It can take your mind off things. Getting more education, increasing your currency, your proficiency, that can reduce your stress in UAS operations. You can feel more confident. Sports, gets out some of the aggression for some of us. Alcohol use can make you feel better. But all of these things can also contribute to stress. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation. So keep that in mind. Your crews are going to have stress. You're going to have stress. You know it. You know from your operations that when we get out there in the field, things start to go wrong often. Rare is the day when everything goes perfectly in UAS operations. So if you're already feeling the effects of stress, if you're already being impacted, then it's just going to make it worse. So keep this in mind. Sometimes the best decision is to realize we're just too stressed out for this job. Tomorrow's a better day. Everybody needs to rest. Maybe there's some office work, maybe there's something else you can do. But the last thing you want to do is increase your risk by not realizing the physical, mental, physiological, social, emotional aspects of life that we don't think about as an aviation deterrent. But all these things affect us as humans, which then affects our ability. We're on the ground. All right? So this may seem like, oh, this is much more important to a pilot or a crew in the air. But remember, you're safe on the ground. The aircraft's up there. It can do a lot of harm if not used properly, if risk is ignored and safety is ignored. So all of this, crew resource management, safety management systems, stress reduction, stress relieving, making sure your mind, body, and spirit are whole, all helps you mitigate risk and keep our airs in the national airspace safe. I'm Dr. Will Austin. This is how to manage stress or how to recognize stress in your crew for Warren Community College.